Have you ever made a deathbed promise? Did you keep it or break it? I had a patient who went for organ donation after cardiac death. His mom wanted us to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to him as we withdrew care in the OR, because she always sang that as a lullaby for him. We, of course, sang it. This hurts more to picture than probably any other story in this thread. My dad was dying of brain cancer, and I had just gotten engaged. He asked me to carry my grandmother's lace Bible down the aisle. When I was married a few months later, I carried the Bible proudly, just as he asked. It was bittersweet. I'm sorry he wasn't there to physically walk you down the aisle, but you know he was there in spirit. My grandmother didn't make me promise or anything, but she was dying in the hospital and told me that I needed to pursue writing because that was what I am good at. I told her I would. Soon after, I quit my construction job and went back to freelance writing, editing and journalism. It took well over a year to make enough money to survive, but now I am a journalist and I do freelance copywriting. It's not quite what she had in mind, maybe, but it's writing nonetheless. When my grandmother was dying, like the last hour she was alive, in the hospital, I told her I would make her proud. Still working on it. Side note, my entire life, my grandmother told me that if anything were to happen to her, to find the cigar box in her room. That was mine. She would mention this every few years. Fast forward to the end, and she sends a family member to get this box for me. I arrive and spend time with her and am told by my family that someone from the hospital staff stole it. I never found out what was in that goddamn cigar box. Frick that person that stole the box. If that happened at my hospital, I would have gone ape crap. I promised my father as I held his hand as he passed away that I would graduate from college before I turned 30. I walked on my 30th birthday. It took all the strength I had that day to keep my composure. My father died from radiation poison that caused lymphoma. He transported Agent Orange during Vietnam, and the poison killed him. Also, left myself and my middle brother unable to have children. Frick war. Not all soldiers die on the battlefield. Hug. Yep, I am the oldest man-child in my family. Dad told me to take care of my siblings. I do. He died the next day. Saved my brother's condo when he got laid off. Put my sister through law school. Youngest brother has been without a job for 2 years and has not starved. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, 2 who's lost his dad too. Though my brothers are still studying, I know what it's like. Good job. Not a deathbed promise. Hopefully, but when I was a wee Landolphin boy, I was at a bowling alley with my father and went off to use the restroom. There was a kid in there, late teens, maybe early 20s, huddled over the sink and crying. I did my thing and afterwards, when washing my hands, asked if he was okay. The guy looked possessed, blood red eyes, veins visible under his skin, sweat drenched hair. He pushed me against the wall and made me promise I would never do drugs. He said if I did, he would find me. I promised, ran back to my father, and that was it. Promise kept. My mom died 2 months ago. She was put into a sleep and I told her I would make sure to take care of my sister. I think she heard me. Whoa, good for you. I'm not sure if I'd be able to do it. What I'm thinking of is pretty silly. When my stepbrother and I were younger, we were really into partying. He said when he dies I better snort a fat line of coke off his casket. He passed away 4 months ago. Overdose. Yet another person I've lost to addiction. So needless to say, I did not sniff a line off his casket. It's in fact the opposite. I'm sick and tired of losing friends and family to the disease of addiction. So, my deathbed promise to all of them is that I will not let my addiction take me to my grave as well. I will try my best to stay clean. I'm so sorry, man. Losing brothers and buddies has got to be so heart-wrenching. Stay strong. Stay strong as you can. And thank you. It's not really a deathbed promise, but my mother was a very depressed, very unhappy woman. This past October, while visiting her for the first time in 5 years, I asked her what would make her happy. She said she will finally be happy when all her children can be together in the same room and get along. There are 7 of us scattered all over the country. We are all very different and some of us haven't spoken in years. On the 27th of January 2012, my father found my mother dead on the living room floor. She had a massive heart attack early in the morning before he woke up. On the 30th of January, 2012 she got her wish. All 7 kids were finally together to tell her goodbye. I like to think maybe she was happy. That's freaking sad, man. 6. Going on 7. Years ago, my greatest friend in the world was shot because he was standing up for his girlfriend. Things turned violent, as he was the kind of man to throw fists at the drop of the hat, especially when people disrespect the ones he loves. Guy pulls a gun. My friend tells his girlfriend to run, which he did. His girlfriend ran around the corner to get help. By the time she came back he was bleeding out on the sidewalk. And then I get a phone call a few hours later. Rushing to hospital. He's in the operating room from a gunshot to the chest. I can't see him. He dies on the table. His girlfriend rode with him in the ambulance, and still conscious. He kept saying to her, "Josh, me, needs to know I love him. He's the best friend I've ever had," and, in his staring death in the face joking attitude, "at this point ever will," he gives off a little laugh. The most profound, brilliant, fearless, tough, and extraordinary man I have ever known. The one person to lift me up out of my linear mindset and show me more than one facet of life was taken from me. I have never cried so hard in my life, nor have I ever been able to afterwards, to this day, because nothing would ever seem to shake me that hard. His girlfriend gave me his hemp bracelet that he made. I still wear it today. It has never left my wrist, nor will it ever. I visit the cemetery with her every year and reflect on what he gave both of us. Love, I miss you, my friend. This is beautiful, though I hate when the internet makes me tear up like this. My grandfather was diagnosed with cancer and was on the deathbed only 2 months later. I came to visit him and he said that the hospital food sucked, and so I promised him some homemade raisin cookies, which were his favorite. He went into a coma that evening and died a few days later. But I still made the crap out of those cookies and left it in his casket when I went up to say goodbye during the funeral. When my girlfriend was diagnosed with an incredibly aggressive cancer, I promised her I'd hold her until she was cold. I kept my promise. You were her last thing on earth. Bless you for real, man. When my grandmother was dying, also of breast cancer, actually, I had gone to visit her without my girlfriend, who had stayed home to clean up a bit, start dinner, and to give me time alone with my grandmother. I walked in, sat down next to the bed, and my grandmother said, "Where is your lady?" I told her she stayed home to clean and such. She said to me, "You need to marry that girl. She loves you very much and you make a great couple." I said I was thinking about it. My grandmother died 2 weeks later after a rather heart-lifting recovery started. Then she took a turn. It made me realize that she was right, and that I was with the person I was going to marry. A few weeks later, after the memorial service, we were driving back home and I stopped at the local jewelry store my dad has always used and shopped for rings. I just wish that my grandmother had made the recovery and lasted for another 8 months. She would have been able to see both the weddings of myself and my sister. She would have been able to see both my wedding and my sister's. The way this comment ends, it sounds like you married your sister. Unfortunately, for the last few days of my great-grandfather's 94 years, he spent in great pain. He barely opened his eyes and breathed heavily. He was given heavy doses of morphine every few hours to help relieve the bone cancer. I don't know that he was aware that his wife of 75 years held his hand until his death, or that she had died of a morphine overdose less than an hour prior. I promised my mother when I was 13 and she passed away from cancer that I would be the only one of her 7 kids to graduate high school. Well, I didn't at the time I was supposed to. I dropped out February my senior year. I ended up getting my GED that October and was accepted into a university. I continued my daily routine and never looked back until one day I was on a smoke break with a coworker. I was 20. We were talking about my high schooling and how I needed 2.5 credits for the distinguished diploma, which in Texas is the highest of 3 diplomas you can receive. It's called a Texas Scholar or something. In Idaho, we were talking, and in my area you can attend public school tuition free until you are 21. I took this as a sign she wanted me to finish it. I went and enrolled with 1 week left in the last semester of 2009 and finished 5 classes in 5 days. I had no real need for it. Going to university and everything on a get already. My ACT scores were a 28, so it helped. Now that I have my diploma, I look back and realize that is one of my proudest accomplishments. I did it on my own. No one pushed me to do it, and I got to see my dad get to watch one of his 7 kids walk across the field and accept that little piece of paper. That I would be the only one of her 7 kids to graduate high school. This made me picture you actively trying to stop your siblings from graduating. I was 14, and I hadn't come out of the proverbial closet. I didn't know what feelings were normal, and I acted like a total fool around a boy who was 2 years older than me. One of those "you're so obvious" things. In my obliviousness, I definitely didn't know that he was also not out of the closet either. More importantly, at the time, I didn't know he was secretly with someone else. Things were a total clusterfuck of naivety and immaturity during the time. To keep a long story short, I was one of the few people he spoke to before committing suicide. The phone call sounded nothing like a cry for help. He just made me promise to be myself, and to be happy with myself and the decisions I make. He told me, jokingly, but the message was serious, that I was obviously crushing hard on him, and that I would learn to play the game one day. His last words to me were, "Take care of yourself." I know that this is a fairly standard goodbye, but I've had the past 10 years of my life to think about that phone call, and I think I've done a fairly good job at taking care of myself, and regretted very few of the important decisions of my life. Whoa, that is amazing that he reached out to give you something positive even when he couldn't take the pressure. My dad was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer and asked me, my cousin and my aunt to take care of my younger brother, who was 18 and been arrested a few times and already been to rehab once. We almost failed him as my brother showed up to my college graduation 6 months later looking like Skeletor. Apparently he'd been using his grocery money on drugs. Within 6 days he was in rehab. My cousin has spent more times than I could count explaining to my brother things like, 1. You need to get a job. 2. You can't live off your trust fund. 3. You shouldn't blow your trust fund on a sweet car. My brother is now almost 2 years sober, had no run-ins with the cops, has had a steady job for 6 months and is finally thinking about going to college. You might be my boyfriend. I promised my brother the day before he died that I would have a son and name the child after him. Still working on that one. At the time I was in a serious relationship that seemed promising. Also it seemed important to both him and me because although he was married, my brother and sister-in-law never had kids. I remember he was unable to talk, but he squeezed my hand incredibly hard and nodded at me. I never wanted to have kids before that, but now I'm looking forward to that phase of my life. That's the perfect way to honor his memory. Things will work out for you. I know it. My grandfather was always happy that I was going into science after high school. He clipped newspaper articles for me to read and would give them to me every time I saw him, or sometimes I would just find them on my desk when I came home to visit. I wasn't doing well my first few semesters, in danger of failing out. I was a self-absorbed prick and thought the classes were boring and I was too smart to study. He got sick and I went to visit him in the hospital before he died. He told me to keep doing what I love, and success will follow. He told me he knew I could do anything I want. I just need to do what I love. I promised that I would, and that I'd see him after finals. Looking back on it, I realize he knew it would be the last time he saw me. I broke my promise and I didn't see him after finals. Because I already didn't study, I only barely passed a required class, Biochem 2, by 0.2 points. The next semester I improved my GPA, but not by much. I was still learning how to study, something I never did until this point. The following semesters I took some of the hardest classes I could, and excelled in all of them because I found a method that worked for me. I was able to sneak into graduate school because of my drastic improvement and grade scores. Got lucky, and finished my MS with a 4.0. Now, I'm receiving interview invites from medical schools. I just wish I could tell him. I promised my nan that I would come back later and say a proper goodbye. I never did, because she died before I could get back to the hospital. It was only a few hours after I left. I will always regret not taking the time to say a proper goodbye. She was awesome. From my experience working in palliative care, patients very often die after family members leave. It's like they hang on really hard in order to be strong for their loved ones. But if the family steps out to grab a bite, etc., they'll slip away. Your nan knew what you meant, even if you didn't say it to her before she died. My best friend of 15 years got in a pretty bad car accident a couple years ago. He made me promise that I would travel all the way around the world without a plane, like we had always planned on doing. Ever since then, I've been putting a little extra money away and hopefully within the next few years I'll be able to do it. On his deathbed, literally, my sons promised their stepdad to take good care of mom and they have fulfilled that promise 1000 times over. Family always has your back. That's amazing. You did a great job raising them, mom. This freaking thread. I'm not sure if this counts since, but my great uncle asked me to get him a sheet of blotter acid if he got the news that the cancer he has was going to get the best of him. He beat that cancer, but last week he found out that he has pancreatic cancer. The doctors said he has 8 to 12 months. I'm going to do my best to keep my promise. Silk Road. Get him the best of blotter acid, my friend. Share the trip with him and have a great time. I'm in the same situation with you. I was very close with my dad and one year when I was about 13 we were on summer holiday and sat up one night talking about all sorts and the topic of smoking came up. Being 52 at the time, he had chain smoked since he was about 16 but hated that he did and so was always very considerate of others around him when he lit up. He told me that he took up smoking because his dad did too. So he said that as much as he hated the idea, that because I had been brought up with smoke, I would probably take it up as well in the future, and although he'd be disappointed in me if I did, that he wouldn't be angry. After that, in a very naive 13 years old way, I swore to him that I'd never even try the things, ever. He laughed. We carried on talking long into the night on the patio and we eventually went to bed. That Christmas he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Lesson learned the hard way. My uncle, on his deathbed, told us to prop him up in the corner and party till you puke. After he died, we bought several $1,000s worth of alcohol, got a DJ, we blew up a photo of him into a life-size cutout and set it next to the bar, and although I hadn't been drunk in probably 6 or 7 years prior to that day, I did indeed party till I puked. I love this. My brother just passed, and we're going to throw a big party at a local bar right after the funeral. The only problem is I don't think there aren't enough cabs in town to drag all of our drunk asses home. Not really a promise but a conversation. My dad was in hospice and on the 25th of July of 2011, I went to visit and we had a long conversation about me pursuing a business. We had a long talk about how it was a dream of mine to pursue this business. He told me he hoped he would make it out of there to see me do it. He passed away on the 18th of August of 2011. On the 25th of July of 2012, I signed the contract to purchase the said business we discussed. Wasn't done on purpose or anything, just an amazing coincidence of the date. Tomorrow is actually the 1-year anniversary of his passing. Unbelievable timing for a thread like this. This might get skipped over but it made me feel proud again for what I accomplished. Thanks to the OP for posting this. One night my dad had told me if ever I'm not around anymore take care of your mom and Monk, my younger brother, because you'll be the man of the house when I'm gone. 8 months later he died of a massive heart attack after work. This was when I was in 5th grade. I was 11 and would be 12 the next month. I have yet to break that promise. 7 years later I work 2 jobs and have finished school and am now going into college. I have fixed the house, paid bills when mom didn't have enough and stood up for my brother when he is teased for being gay. I will always keep that promise. As a gay little brother, thank you. Nothing in this thread has made me cry until this comment. I wish I could shake your hand. You are a good man and never let anyone say otherwise. My grandfather's deathbed request demand was that I reconcile with my father, scumbag, abusive, druggy, etc., rather than make a scene or argue with him. I said sure. I have not patched things up, nor have any intent to do so. I felt a simple lie to a dying man was an acceptable burden. I hope it made his remaining days better. Never been on the deathbed scenario, but I'm in this position myself. Thing is, he may be on his deathbed if I ever do come around to reconciliation. But I don't want reconciliation. I imagine I'd say, life is complicated. You're an butthole, and life is complicated it. But if you need it, I forgive you. Thanks for sharing your story, mate. Gives me something to think about. I did my best to keep my promise. Mom recently died of ovarian cancer. I got to spend her last week with her in her house, and she asked that I hold her hand when she went to the mortuary. The process of removing a dead person from their bed and into the truck starts by wrapping them in plastic. So I learned quickly that I couldn't keep my promise. Instead, I asked if they'd allow me to carry her to the truck. I did that. Cancer's a B. TL. DR. Yes, sort of. You are very brave for doing that. My brother and I always fought when we were young, and all through our 20s. Truth be told, we really disliked each other intensely. Our dad suddenly got cancer and he was sinking fast. All his friends would tell us how worried he was that we fought all the time. We didn't know how much this tore him up. As he lay on his deathbed, my brother and I threw ourselves into each other's arms and promised we would never fight again. Through thick and thin, no matter what, for 20 years. We never did again. We saved our dad's company from bankruptcy and always stuck together, and finally became each other's most loyal friend. My brother had a heart attack a few years ago, and lay in a coma 4 weeks before he was taken off life support. As he lay unconscious and dying, I told him not to worry. I would take care of his kids, and I have. They are the ones who got me on Reddit. Huh. So no matter what you feel about someone, you just never know. So sorry about your dad and bro. Your bro's kids now have a great role model. My husband asked me not to cut my, then unborn, I was pregnant, son's hair. He grabbed my arm and made me promise. To this day, I have no idea why he asked for that. He was being taken to emergency surgery and never came back. I have never cut my son's hair. He wears it in cornrows at the moment. I've told my child why he hasn't had a haircut. When he gets older, he can decide for himself about it. Although I am not sure how I will handle it when he does. Keep your son away from women named Delilah. I haven't, but my so has. My godmother asked him to protect me. Then with the same breath she asking him to throw her wake. She passed a couple minutes later. Things are rough, but all in all he's done a pretty good job so far, and the wake was kick-ass. My mother was dying from cancer, and I was a relatively intelligent freak up who was still on probation for selling grass. She made me promise to go back to school. I now have a BA and MCS in computer science, and I'm working on an MS in biostats. Love you, mom. I just saw love you, mom and tid up. I haven't seen my daughter since May and she is due home in a week or so and I'm going to hug her so dang hard. I'm sorry for your mom and she'd be so proud. My grandma was abused by her first husband, and my mom was abused by my dad up until their divorce. My grandma worried that I would be next in line, since I tended to date douchebags. By this time, I was in my first serious relationship with my now husband. She was in a coma and hadn't made a sound except pain gasps on her deathbed. I told her, I don't want you to worry. I promise I'll marry a good man. I love you. Then she grumbled for the first time that day. I wound up marrying that man. I kept my promise. I'll never know if my grandma actually heard me. She heard you. When I was 11, the night before my mom passed away from lung cancer, it was the night before Thanksgiving. If you want it to be more sad, I made a promise that I would never smoke anything ever. I am 23 now and have still never smoked anything. Makes things kind of awkward when you're the only one who seems to have no interest in smoking weed. Don't worry, you aren't the only one. My grandmother died less than a month ago. I was on the phone with her. She lives far away and my dad, her son, was the only one who could find a plane down. One morning, she passed away that afternoon. In addition to telling me to live a wonderful life and never to waste a second of it, I'm a runner. She told me to skip her funeral service if it meant it would interrupt my running. The service fell during the Junior Olympics, Same day I was scheduled to run with the rest of my relay team. I went to the race. My team was 5th in the country. After watching my dad fight so hard to stay alive for over a year, I promised I'd never even consider suicide no matter how hard it got. 14 at the time. I've gone through depression but the thought never even crosses my mind. Too important to promise. My dad battled terminal cancer and had a self-dose a thing with morphine so he could deal with the pain. He hated being dependent on that thing, and yet desperately wanted to keep living. Anyway, the last time I talked to him and we both knew he only had hours left, he asked me to never do drugs, because he felt the addicting pull. I'm keeping that promise. When I was younger I told my mother that I was going to see my teacher to give her a hug on the day of her daughter's funeral. I read about it in the newspaper. I waited in a huge line, mom at my side, watching my teacher hug stranger after stranger with a sad look on her face. When I got up to her, she burst into tears and immediately made me promise to never hurt myself. I've never broken that promise and never will. I should find her and thank her for showing me how death affects those closest to you. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.